Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Big Man Japan, a Japanese comedy kaiju film from 2007 that was directed by Hitoshi Matsumoto. Now I recently reviewed R100, another Matsumoto film, so it's time to cover Big Man Japan because it's the only other film in his filmography that is still easy to find. In this documentary-style film, a group of filmmakers follow a middle-aged man who periodically transforms into a giant to defend Japan against various monsters. Yes, you heard that correctly. Our protagonist is a normal-looking Japanese dude who lives a relatively normal life until a giant monster shows up, and there's a variety of them, and attacks the city. At that point, he goes to a special facility, electrifies himself to become a giant defender of Japan, and does so accordingly. Now, I guess this is similar in some ways to something like Ultraman, really, if you've ever seen that show. However, Big Man Japan distinguishes itself from the typical kaiju or tokusatsu story because it's directed by Hitoshi Matsumoto. Now, this is shot, as I said, in a documentary style during the interview segments, which is most of the film. But that changes during the kaiju monster fights because the camera work goes back to a more traditional non-documentary style for those scenes. Now, throughout much of the film, we basically follow our hero. You get like a news crew just following him with a camera as it goes about his daily life. And he talks to the interviewer, the camera and the viewer really, about his job and his frustrations in life. We also get interviews with other people who interact with him, like the cook at the local restaurant or his co-workers. He works at the Department for Monster Prevention, by the way. Now, the problem is that our protagonist's life is not that glamorous. You figuring this guy's saving, Japan, and he'd be, rich and living it up? Oh, no. No, that's not the case. In fact, he lives rather cheaply, based off of a not-so-generous, stipend from the government. And most Japanese citizens have a pretty negative opinion of him. So he doesn't have the greatest reputation. So the irony of this situation is that he has all of this great power, but his life still sucks. And that's where much of the humor comes from. Now, the opening 20 minutes are a little bit slow to set things up due to the plot setups and stuff like that. But the first really funny scene occurs when he goes to his first power-up session to level up into a giant, and he's driving his moped, his little bike, up a hill, and there's tons of these hand-drawn signs and just berating this guy, criticizing him for doing things wrong and making mistakes. And when that scene happened, the film won me over on that scene. It's not something you typically see in a kaiju film. Big Man Japan almost kind of lulls you into a state of complacency at times due to kind of its laid-back style during the interview segments, but then it kind of explodes with humor and or kaiju insanity. Now, one strength of the script, and I think this is the main strength of the film, it focuses a lot on the daily life of this ridiculous situation, like the daily life impact of it. Some of the stuff they focus on is relatively minor stuff that you would never think of, being able to go places for free. I'm saving this country when monsters show up. You think, when I'm in my off time, you show up at a restaurant, they give me a meal for free or something. I don't know. It might not work out that way. Or having a fan club dedicated to you, or making money off of sponsorships from advertisers, or how television ratings are affected during the monster attacks. All of these little things that most monster films never even bother to even address, but Big Man Japan actually explores some of them. And the humor emerges from those topics, as well as how they've changed or degraded over the years. You know what I mean? Because this guy's predecessors were also, giant monster defenders, I guess you could say. So that's where much of the uniqueness, creativity, and entertainment value flows from. I actually think the world building in this film is actually pretty impressive. But then we get the monster battles, right? You're well, it's a kaiju film. What about the monster battles? Well, they're basically a parody of monster fights, and they're played for laughs. And I think they're pretty successful at doing so. Some of them are the best parts of the film, even though I think the foundation of the film is the most important, with kind of the everyday living stuff. You get these monster battles that are just, in terms of pure entertainment value, are probably the best parts of the film. There's certain little details, like when the monsters fight, you never see people running in the street. Like ever. Like people just don't exist. All of a sudden, when the monsters start fighting, which is pretty funny. Yeah, that was pretty funny. And then there's an outrageousness to all of this. Like, to the monster designs. Like, when they were thinking of these monster designs, they must have been drinking or something, because I'm a big fan of creative kaiju that I've never seen before. And this movie has some doozies, folks. There are times where one of these evil monsters will show up, and you'll just be sitting there, like, just shaking your head at just how ridiculous the monster design is. And it's pretty funny to watch. And also, each of these evil monsters is introduced by a brief voiceover and like a picture, like an old school painting from like the 1940s or something, or 1800s. And there's a little bit of a voiceover to who the monster is and some of their basic attributes before the fight begins, which is kind of neat. It gives a little diversity in presentation, too. Now, there is rampant use of CGI for the kaiju fights, some of which is kind of low quality, but it's intended for comedic effect anyway, so I kind of think it works. You know what I mean? I give it kind of a pass. Now, I've seen some kaiju films, even in, like, recent years, from, like, the 2000s, that are, like, real low budget, and they go for comedy because they're too incompetent to do anything else. And they're like, well, we're not going to take the film seriously. Let's just try to be stupid and not put any effort to the film. And it turns out atrocious. This film is different. There's a lot of effort put into the script and the world building. And even though some of the CG effects are kind of dodgy, when you watch it, you're laughing. So it works, And the big finale in this film, I'm not going to spoil. Again, it's one of those scenes where I laugh hysterically when I watch it. So look out for the finale in this. So yeah, I think this film is definitely, it's totally worth a watch. I strongly recommend this film, especially if you're a fan of like kaiju films or monster films. In fact, it's probably the film to start with if you're exploring this director. Because R100 it's a little bit more niche in terms of its style of humor. It's a little bit of a naughtier style of humor, whereas this is just like, it's more of a crowd pleaser, big man Japan. It's currently available streaming, and also it's on Region 1 DVD. I watched the behind-the-scenes featurette on the DVD, and these guys seemed to have a really good time when they were making this, and this shows up in the final product. So check this one out if you want a nutty kaiju comedy. And as always, I'll see you next time.